I have heard good things about the process over the last few months, and that doesn't always happen when you bring in a new GM with a scouting staff that's already in place.
I also like the idea of not kowtowing to this narrative of do whatever you can do to get everybody for Justin Fields, protect him, find him targets, maximize him, where it seems like they've got bigger things to do. And it's not a slap at Justin Fields at all. It is Ryan Poles saying this team is very far away. They have a lot of needs. The last thing they can try to do right now is try to retrofit this roster, any roster, to this kid. And if he wants to learn and be good and be better and justify a lot of our optimism, that's cool. But it tells me my big takeaway was Poles knows how far away the Bears are.
Well, there's a very small admission from him too that almost kind of got overlooked on Friday night, I thought, where he talked about this and he said in there, he goes, I know that we're not going to be able to fix everything in 1 year. And we all know that, but just to hear the GM actually say it out loud was refreshing too. And so he gets it. I think I want to bring up the Baltimore Ravens for a second, because to me, a lot of this is just about process. And the Ravens, what they do is just impressive to me all the time. So they have the 14th overall pick on Thursday, and there's this run on wide receivers. And that's another side of this that I think Bears fans could look at a different way. I understand everyone's upset they didn't get one of these top wide receivers, but a lot of the times when there's depth at one position, you can take advantage of that by taking a different position by guys that fall to you. Okay, to me, Kyler Gordon and Jaquan Brisker are both defensive backs that were worthy of going in the first round. But the Bears benefited from this run on wide receivers, from a team like the Packers trading up then in the second round to grab another wide receiver that maybe the Bears were interested in, maybe they weren't, in Christian Watson. But the point is, patience can pay off in the draft. So the Ravens are sitting there at 14, and Kyle Hamilton, the safety from Notre Dame, falls to them. In my opinion, falls to them. I thought he was a top 5 talent in this draft. And when the Ravens do something like that, my immediate reaction is, oh, Kyle Hamilton's going to be a 3-time All-Pro, like immediately, because that's just what happens when they draft a safety like that with good process in the draft.
Wasn't that the Morgan Burnett pick? I'm trying to remember the guy the Bears were tied to this guy, then the Packers end up taking him. I'm always interested in those narratives.
Well, and then they draft a guy, I think Hollywood Brown was the 25th overall pick 3 years ago. Okay, and he's an okay, good, but not great wide receiver. And all of a sudden the Cardinals are like, we want Hollywood Brown. So they trade him for the 23rd overall pick 3 years later. You know what I mean? Like, it's just good process. And then they get a phone call from a team that wants to move up, and they move back a couple more picks, and they still land Tyler Linderbaum, who's probably the best interior offensive lineman in the entire draft after doing all that. So that's just good process. And so for the Bears to sit back the way they did, and I'm sure that they were trying to trade back, but when they get a guy like Kyler Gordon who falls to them, or Jaquan Brisker who falls to them, and you heard Ryan Poles talk about this on Saturday night too, and he goes, yeah, we could have traded back, but why would we just let a player who in our evaluation we believe can be a starter and be a potential All-Pro, why would we let that player go? Because to your point, Dan, they have so many needs. I feel like cornerback is one of their biggest needs, because they not only have one starting cornerback position open right now, they have two, because the slot cornerback spot has not been filled either. So that was a huge position of need, and they filled it right away with Kyler Gordon.
What do you think led them to a 25-year-old gadget player in Velus Jones?
Yeah, interesting question. I think I care less about when Poles brings up like crazy names like Tyreek Hill and Deebo Samuel, and just the fact that in today's NFL, guys like this work, and you also got to look at the area of the draft they're drafting him in. Okay, and I go back to Tariq Cohen. Okay, so Tariq Cohen, I don't know how people view Tariq Cohen at this point, because it didn't work out. He's not with the team anymore. But that was kind of a catastrophic knee injury that is rare. Most times when somebody tears their ACL, they come back and they're okay. He was a guy who earned a second contract. Whether he earned that contract too early or not, he was going to earn that second contract with the Bears, which means it was a successful draft pick. And so I kind of look at, this type of pick the same way, where if he can come in and I think he's going to be a guy who gets the ball early, somebody that they work on the field, even if it's only like 10% of the snaps or 20% of the offensive snaps, get him on the field. And if he can command the attention from the defense, then that's what the Bears need on offense. That's what's going to help Justin Fields. Because right now my biggest concern with them not taking a true X wide receiver, which was always a small chance, quite frankly, that you could find one of those guys from where the Bears were drafting and was going to be able to play that right away. But now my question is, how does Darnell Mooney get open when he's going to have the attention of the defense, when he's going to be the number one guy that they're keyed on all the time? So, a couple of these guys, and it's not just the wide receiver they drafted, but even a guy like Trestan Ebner, this running back they got later on from Baylor, he's got some really good wide receiver or receiving type skills out of the backfield. I wonder if they can work him in to line up in the slot. And so you put a couple of guys like that on the field, it's going to at least make the defense account for them. And that will help Justin Fields and Darnell Mooney get some completions.
Is Dominique Robinson an actual 4-3 hand-on-the-ground defensive end?
No, because he ran a 4.7. But what's interesting to me about Dominique Robinson is I looked up the comps to Mark Anderson. Because as soon as they drafted Dominique Robinson, I'm thinking Mark Anderson. I'm thinking a guy who they can work on the field as a rookie in obvious passing downs. Now, is he going to get 12 sacks like Mark Anderson got as a rookie? Probably not. But similar scheme, similar defense, and what's very fascinating to me is their height, weight, and speed comps are almost identical. Not the 40 time. I don't really care about the 40 time for a defensive end. I care more about the shorter splits, the 10-yard splits, the 20-yard splits, the short shuttle. They're almost identical to Mark Anderson coming out of college, and the Bears also drafted him in the 5th round. Now, the question is, do you view, Mark Anderson after that rookie year, never really stuck.
1 year wonder. I mean, the headline for me for Mark Anderson is 1 year wonder.
Okay, and that's why I was going to ask you, because do you view Mark Anderson as a successful draft pick?
You have to. He had a 12-sack season.
Yeah. So and that's where again I go back to
a lot of guys get cut and they don't even play football again, right?
Well, and that's where I go back to where these guys are picked, right? So at the end of the day, 10 years later, do you go yes or no question? Was that guy a successful draft pick? And if Mark Anderson, even though he's a 1 year wonder, never really stuck as a starter, is a yes, then can Dominique Robinson be that guy as a 5th round pick? Probably he's got a chance to. So I like, it's another way of me saying here, I like the idea of drafting this traits guy here at this spot, put him on the field, let him go be a race car on 3rd down and go get the quarterback. And he's probably, I don't know he's ever going to develop into a reliable starter, but if he can make some splash impact plays, similar to what even Travis Gibson did last year, then it's a good pick.
Let's run through the running back position real quick because they did take Trestan Ebner. And now that Ryan Nall is finally he and Harvey Unga, I think, are going to sit and have lunch and play gin somewhere. Just the longtime Bears who were Bears forever for no apparent reason. But it looks like that position may be, barring another signing, kind of set.
Oh yeah, I think it's one of their better positional rooms right now, if not the best. I mean, David Montgomery's still really good every down back, even if he's not an all-pro type. Khalil Herbert, I think that there's some optimism with Khalil Herbert that he can become an every down back. And then, I'm blanking on the guy they brought in from Tennessee. But
oh, yeah. I forgot about
not the
that
fullback.
No.
Not the full. Blazing Game's on the roster, the fullback. And he's an interesting guy, too, because he's almost built more like a tight end than a fullback. He's very tall. Anyway, there's some depth there. And now they bring in a guy like Trestan Ebner. And I'm a big fan of drafting running backs every year because you're seeing that the positional value right now, they fall. And there's a lot of them. And so you can find a David Montgomery in the 3rd round, or Khalil Herbert in the 6th round, or a Trestan Ebner later on in the draft. And that gives you the flexibility and you don't have to go out and pay David Montgomery. I hate to say that because I like David Montgomery a lot, but there's no rush now to go give him a big running back contract, which has been pretty much proven at this point is usually not a smart business decision. You keep rotating these guys in. And again, Ebner's a little different. Watch his film. He can catch the football. He's also a very good returner. And I think between Velus Jones Jr. and Trestan Ebner, I wouldn't be surprised if Velus Jones ends up handling the punt return duties and Trestan Ebner ends up handling the kick return duties. And that was a question mark for me. Velus Jones is also a gunner. So on special teams, that's a position I thought they got weaker at last year when they lost Sherrick McManus and Cordell Patterson. So I think they really boosted their special teams too with a lot of these picks, especially having 11 draft picks. Like that's instant impact in the 3rd phase.
4 offensive linemen taken. Do you know how they sort this out and how they figure out who's going to play where?
Great question. I'm fully admitting this. Like a lot of these guys, I don't know a whole lot about because they went later on.
Nobody does. And they're offensive linemen.
Yeah, I know. That's part of the problem, too. So, when you draft a guy out of Southern University and Southern Utah and San Diego State, I will say this, though. Zach Thomas, the left tackle they drafted out of San Diego State, he started his career there as a right guard. He's playing he's not in a Power 5 school, so I think they kind of moved him to tackle by necessity, and he was able to pull it off at that level. When I watch him play, I see a kind of a mean streak, and I see a guy who's going to be a little bit limited at tackle getting to the outside. But if you put him at right guard, I think he fits this outside zone running scheme. So it's more of a hunch than anything I've been told or heard in the last 48 hours since they drafted him. But Zach Thomas, to me, just watching him, I would not be surprised if he gets thrown in the right guard competition. And is of these 4 guys they drafted as offensive linemen, has a chance to get on the field early to potentially be that right guard.
Let me bounce this idea off of you. I mentioned this earlier. You're the perfect guy to evaluate this because of the time that you spent covering Northwestern. My belief is the 2022 Bears may remind us of one of these scrappy Northwestern teams in that they're going to play hard for their coach. They're going to be where they're supposed to be. They're in large part going to be an assignment-sound team that ultimately is going to lose some tight games, maybe a lot of them. That they may not get blown out a lot, and they may hang in there and get us excited. But other teams with better guys, especially in the 4th quarter, are going to throw the ball and hand the ball to those guys and have those guys defending the Bears guys. That it's going to be maybe one of those years where it just kind of feels like you keep banging your head against a wall, but it's not necessarily a bad thing when putting in an NFL foundation because things change in the league quickly.
No, absolutely, especially when you're in the NFL and it's not Northwestern where you can get those dudes eventually. So if you put in the foundation of what Northwestern does, and I heard you say this earlier, Dan, I like where you're going with this, and you're right. I mean, I had the pleasure, quite frankly, is the word I would put, to be able to watch that program on the sidelines, like up close and personal, and see the way the coaches interact with the players during the game and the way they preach this stuff, and be able to go to practices and see it. And it's about buy-in, right? It's the same things we're talking about with the Bears. Buy into what they're doing as a program. Hustle constantly. Don't commit penalties. Northwestern is one of the best programs in not committing penalties. And they drafted guys who don't commit penalties, like Kyler Gordon and Brisker. Like these guys, it's insane to play in the Pac-12 as a cornerback and not commit a penalty in 2 years. I don't even know how that's possible. Like at some point there's going to be a play where they're hand fighting and a ref makes a bad call and you get flagged.
Yeah, I would almost want at least one to show that you're doing your job aggressively. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like you're near a wide receiver.
Yes.
Like you would think at some point but I mean, that's very impressive. So, I think what you're getting at here is true, that they're really trying to set that foundation. They drafted guys that are going to fit the foundation, and it's probably going to keep them in games. You're right. The way that they play, I hope it does. It should, theoretically. And then it's the NFL, so you might even back into a win or two because the other team doesn't show up. The talent gap is not nearly as big as it is when you see Northwestern then hit the Big Ten championship game and have to play Justin Fields and Chris Olave and all these wide receivers, and they just can't keep up with the speed. At the NFL level, you're going to run into that from here to here, like when you're going to go up against Aaron Rodgers, and we see how that usually works out. But a lot of these weeks, the Bears are going to be able to compete. And that's one of the reasons why I keep saying, like, I'm not saying this team is going to be good or make the playoffs by any means. I would not take that leap. I find it hard to believe that they're going to win fewer than 6 games, which is what they won last year, just because of the way they're playing. And if they do end up being one of these teams that only wins 2 or 3 games, that probably means Justin Fields didn't work out. Right. And that's the scary thing. So that's where I really do feel like this is probably still a 6, 7, or 8 win team, partially because of what you're talking about and the way they're going to play.